Hola, ¿qué tal? ¿Cómo estás? Welcome back to Spanish Lessons with Professor Jason, your guide to Spanish. Have you ever had difficulty using the Spanish demonstrative adverbs of place, these forms here? Aquí, acá, allí, allí, or allá? Do you sometimes hesitate or second guess yourself because you're not sure which form to use in a given situation? Honestly, it can be a bit challenging, and many of the dictionaries, textbooks, and grammar guides out there don't do much to reduce the confusion. Also, lots of the explanations I'm finding online are misleading or incomplete. So what I want to do in today's lesson is to clear up some of the confusion surrounding the meanings and uses of these forms, aquí, acá, allí, allí, and allá. I'll provide what I think are some pretty good guidelines for using these demonstrative adverbs of place to talk about distance and location. And we'll look at some of the other common uses as well. So, sounds like we've got a lot to cover. Let's go ahead and get started. Empecemos. Now, really quickly, I just wanted to sort of introduce the stars of the show, right? You might see these images as we go through the lesson. We have aquí and acá, allí, and allí, allá. All right, and as usual, I want to start off by just giving you an overview of what we're going to be talking about. I'm going to start by providing some caveats or things to keep in mind about the guidelines that I present in this lesson. Then we're going to go through the sort of three categories, aquí, acá, allí, allí, and allá. And I'm going to do three different things for each of these. I'm going to talk about some of the guidelines, when and how to use them. I'm going to give some examples. And then I'm going to talk about some differences or distinctions among these. So I'll do that for each of these three groups. Then toward the end of the lesson, we'll focus on some of the other uses, right? To refer to moments in time, in phrases in which the meanings are fairly literal, and then in some more idiomatic kinds of expressions. So that's the overview. So as we go through this lesson, there's a few things I'd like you to keep in mind. First, I want to emphasize that this lesson is just that, just an overview. It'd be nearly impossible to count for all the many, many uses of these demonstrative adverbs of place. Not to mention, there's a lot of regional variation, which can't be neatly summarized in a single short video. Secondly, the guidelines I'm going to present here are not hard and fast rules. They're simply the best guidelines I could come up with after studying a number of sources and looking at lots and lots of examples of common patterns of usage. I'd also like to emphasize that there can be substantial variation in the use of these forms depending on the dialects of different speakers. And along those lines, in the interest of full disclosure, I guess, I'd say that my guidelines probably reflect a slight bias for Latin American usage. That's what I'm most familiar with. And finally, although these demonstrative adverbs of place are primarily used to talk about distance, space, and location, many of them have different uses, different common uses, and we'll discuss a few of those as well. Okay, so let's start off by talking about the forms aquí and acá and how they're used to indicate distance, space, and location. So we're going to use aquí and acá when we want to indicate little or no distance from where I'm at, from the speaker. So in terms of English equivalents, they're concepts like here, over here, where I'm at my location, right? I'm going to use aquí. Now, these forms that we're looking at in this lesson, demonstrative adverbs of place, are often combined with certain demonstrative adjectives, such as this or these. So aquí and acá are going to tend to be used with este, esta, estos, and estas, right? So if I wanted to say this car here, where I'm at, este coche aquí, right? Or these cars here, estos coches aquí. So it's very common to see these appear together. The demonstrative adverbs of place in this lesson can also be combined with other adverbs of place, such as cerca, right? Close. Aquí mismo, acá mismo, right here. Aquí abajo, down here. Acá arriba, up here, right? Aquí adentro, inside here. Or I'm out here, estoy acá fuera. So keep that in mind. So here are some examples that I think illustrate some of the things we just talked about, right? ¿Tú eres de aquí también? Are you from here too? No, no soy de acá. No, I'm not from here. Tenía las entradas aquí en mi cartera. I had the tickets here in my handbag. Here in my handbag. Aquí en mi cartera. Voy a comprar esta blusa aquí. That would be something like, I'm going to buy this blouse, but the idea of here is in the mix, right? I'm going to buy this here blouse, or I'm going to buy this blouse here. Voy a comprar esta blusa aquí. And again, you see that combination with the adjective esta blusa. Te voy a esperar aquí mismo. I'm going to wait for you right here. La casa de mis abuelos queda por aquí cerca, or aquí cerca, right? My grandparents' house is close by, or close by here. Nos encanta estudiar acá en esta universidad. We love studying here at this university. Now, some of you might be wondering, and perhaps it's the reason you found this lesson, what differences are there between the uses of aquí or acá, and later on we'll talk about allí and allá. What are the differences? Well, here's my take on aquí and acá, okay? In some dialects, right, aquí may indicate greater precision, whereas acá might be used to indicate the idea of sort of a space or a zone, although that zone or space could be relatively large or relatively small, but still the idea is here. Examples: te espero aquí en mi casa, that's relatively small, or hace buen tiempo acá donde vivo, relatively large. Acá also, I think, tends to be used more in Latin American dialects than in Spain. Of course, it depends where in Spain. And acá may also be used more than aquí with verbs of motion and with prepositions. So in an expression like ven para acá, a little bit more common than ven para aquí, ven aquí. Mis primas también son de acá. All right, let's take a look at ahí. Remember, the H is silent, of course. Ahí. Using ahí to indicate distance, space, and location. So we're going to use ahí to indicate something that's relatively close to the speaker. As you can see from the photograph, right? She's pointing at something that's within just a few meters. So normally within your immediate, right, context, in the same room, just a few meters away. Ahí. So the English equivalents are things like right there, right over there, or just over there. And in terms of specificity, you're being precise in terms of location. It's in that location. Está ahí. Now this one, in terms of the demonstrative adjectives, ahí is often used with ese, esa, esos, and esas, which mean that one over there, right? And they can be combined as well. This one, ahí, can be combined as well with other adverbs of place. So ahí mismo, right? Right over there, in that exact location. Ahí encima de, ahí debajo de, dentro, fuera. So let's look at some examples of ahí that illustrate what we just talked about. Puedes dejar ese libro ahí sobre la mesa. You can leave that book on the table there, or there on the table. Alcánzame ese lápiz ahí, por favor. So you might be sitting across the table from someone, but you're in the same room. It's less than a few meters. You want to say, hey, can you pass me that pencil over there? Ese lápiz ahí, por favor. Uh-oh, ahí va el bus que queremos tomar. There it goes. I can see it. It's just up the street, very close. There goes the bus we wanted to take, or we want to take. Ahí va el bus que queremos tomar. Me gusta esa camisa ahí, la celeste. So we might be in a shop, in a store at the mall, looking over a couple feet away, and I'm pointing out that shirt. Me gusta esa camisa, again, combination with esa camisa ahí, la celeste. I like that shirt over there, the light blue one. Dejé mis pantuflas ahí debajo de la cama. I left my slippers under the bed there, or there under the bed. Te están esperando ahí afuera. They're waiting for you outside there, or right outside there. Okay? Just a couple minutes ago, we talked about the possible distinction or differentiation between the forms aquí and acá. Some people might wonder, what about differences between ahí and allí, which we haven't quite talked about yet? Well, this is because the forms ahí and allí are in fact frequently confused, even by native speakers. My theory is that this is probably because they can be pronounced very similarly or even identically depending on a speaker's dialect. So there's 2 or 3 results that flow from this, right? It's possible, right, that some uses of allí have been subsumed by ahí. And there are also, as a result of this pronunciation, right, lack of distinction in pronunciation in some dialects, there's not always a clear distinction between ahí and allí in speech, and even in writing. So again, a third consequence is that even native speakers may end up using these forms interchangeably or inconsistently, again, in speech and in writing. Okay? Guess what? Bottom line, it's not that big of a deal, right? But in light of these things, try to keep, the uses of allí that we've just discussed in mind as we turn our attention to allí and allá. And if you forget, you can always come back, rewind, and review, so no worries. All right, then, moving on to the third kind of grouping, right? Using allí and allá. So I'm making a special effort to differentiate between allí with H and allí, allá, right? So using these two to indicate distance, space, and location. When we use allí or allá, right, in terms of distance, we're referring to a location or locations that's far or distant from the speaker. So anything beyond just a few meters away, which is what this photograph is supposed to indicate. In terms of English equivalents, right, they express the ideas of there, over there, or even way over there, that idea of off in the distance, okay? Allí and allá also often appear with the equivalent demonstrative adjectives for that and those, right? That and those. So ese or aquel, right? Aquel means something a little bit further away, or aquella, aquellos, aquella, right? So, and these two forms, allí and allá, can also be combined with other adverbs of place, such as mismo, allá mismo, right over there, allí mismo, over there, but in that precise location, right? Allá abajo, down there somewhere, allá arriba, up there somewhere. It could be pointing to a mountaintop. Allá arriba, lo veo allá arriba. I can see him up there, okay? Or inside there, allá adentro or allí adentro, right? Okay, so again, these can be combined with other adverbs of place, and they're often used with the demonstrative adjectives, the grouping of ese and aquel, all right? Okay, so here we see some examples that illustrate the uses of allí and allá that we just talked about on the previous slide, right? Estaré allí en Bogotá el martes. I'll be there, right? I'm here in Miami, let's say, and I'm on the phone with you. You're in Bogotá. I say, estaré allí en Bogotá el martes. Or we're standing on a street, we're standing out in my driveway, and I say, ¿ves esa casa allá en la esquina? You see that house over there on the corner? Allá, right? Over there. ¿Ves esa casa allá en la esquina? I'm talking about a friend of mine, and I say, su familia es de allá, del estado de Sonora. So we're here in the States, for example, in the United States, and I say, su familia es de allá, right? Her family's from there, from way over there, from the state of Sonora. We're down in a valley and we're looking up, right? We see some hikers way up on a mountain. Hace mucho frío allá arriba del monte. Allá arriba, right? Allá arriba. It's very cold up there, way up there on the summit, okay? Los padres de Francisco se conocieron allí en Miami. Allí en Miami. So we're not in Miami. Now we're in Dallas, and we're talking about Francisco's parents. Se conocieron allí en Miami, right? If we're in Miami, I'd say, se conocieron aquí o acá en Miami. So someone says, hey, where's the kids? No te preocupes. Están jugando allá afuera, right? Los niños están jugando allá afuera, out there, outside there. So the question may emerge, right? Is there a difference? Should there be a distinction between allí and allá? What is the difference, right? Are they the same? Are they different? And maybe that's what brought you to this lesson in the first place. We already talked about aquí and acá. So again, here's my take on what's the difference, right? Again, in some dialects, allí may indicate greater precision, right? They both refer to something far away, but maybe I use allí, maybe, in some dialects, to indicate greater precision, whereas allá may be used to indicate approximate space, to invoke the idea of an area or a zone, right? But keep in mind, again, that the size of such a zone could, in a native speaker's mind, or in a speaker's mind, vary from something vast, right, to a relatively small area. So let's say I'm getting ready to visit my friend who lives in Chile, and I'm worried about crime, right? I'm on the phone with him from the United States, and I might say, ¿hay mucho crimen allá? So allá could mean allá in Chile, or when I say, ¿hay mucho crimen allá?, I could be referring to his neighborhood, right? So again, that idea of a zone, right, is kind of fluid. And in my mind, the evidence I've looked at, there's really not much evidence to support this precision-based distinction between the use of allí or allá. Another thing I think it's important to point out, and this is a correction of several lessons I've seen online, is that allí and allá are not used to specify different degrees of distance from the speaker. You don't use one, for example, allí, to indicate that something's kind of far away, and the other, for example, allá, to indicate that something's really far away. You just don't. So that's what this little illustration, right? If I'm the guy in the cap, right, and I'm pointing to a couple things, one of them's relatively far, the other one's super far, I can use either one to refer to both. I can say, me gusta esa casa allí, or me gusta esa casa allá. I can also say, me encanta aquella ciudad allí, right? If we're looking way off in the distance, we see a city. Or I can say, me encanta aquella ciudad allá. In other words, there is no distinction in terms of degree of distance from the speaker. And while we're talking about the differences or possible differences between the uses of allí or allá, I think it's also important to emphasize that what's important when we talk about these adverbs of place is distance from the speaker only. In other words, distance from the listener is irrelevant. Okay? It depends on your point of view as the speaker. So in Spanish, allí and allá both refer to any location that's far away from or distant from the speaker. So here in the scenario at the bottom of the slide, we have a woman who's calling from, let's say, China, right? And she's talking to a man in, let's say, Europe. For her, every time she mentions something far away, she's going to use either allí or allá. So she might say to her friend, right, Paul in London, ¿Cómo está el clima allí? Or she could say, ¿Cómo está el tiempo? ¿Qué tiempo hace allá? Right? And he's going to say, oh, aquí or acá hace buen tiempo. Now let's say they start talking about Miami. In that case, depending on their perspective as speaker, right, they can both either use allí or allá because it's something distant from them as speakers. Now really, one of the only reasons I brought that up, the fact that what matters is distance from the speaker only, is because in Brazilian Portuguese, you have the adverbs of place allí and lá, which you might associate in your mind, right, if you're learning both Spanish and Portuguese with allí and allá. But Brazilian Portuguese is different, and there is a distinction made between the forms aí, which means something far from the speaker but at the listener's location, and lá, which would be something far or away from both speaker and listener. So again, our woman in Asia is going to say, right, what's the weather like there where you're at? She's going to say, right, ¿Cómo está el clima ahí? Right? And he's going to understand that that's here where I'm at. But if they switch topics and start talking about Miami, they're both going to say, right, o clima é muito bom lá, right? Because it's removed from both of them. But again, that's in Portuguese. In Spanish, what matters only is distance from the speaker. And if something's far away, you can use allí or allá. And then just a final couple notes about possible differences between allí or allá. From now, you might be able to figure out that for me, I think they're basically interchangeable and it doesn't really matter. But let's just take a look at these two. Allá tends to be used more in Latin American dialects than in Spain. And I've tested this out with native speakers. So if I give them examples, right, and have them choose between allí and allá when referring to something far away, whether it's precise or general location, 9 times out of 10, the Latin American speaker uses allá. Allá may also be used more than allí with verbs of motion and with prepositions, similar to acá, right? So, ¿a qué hora vamos para allá? Para being the preposition. Salieron corriendo hacia allá. They took off running toward that distant location. Mi tío es de allá también. All right, now at this point, we've talked about the uses of aquí, acá, allí, allí, and allá as demonstrative adverbs of place, space, location in Spanish. So if you're satisfied, if that's all you wanted to know, feel free to turn me off and go about your day. But if you'd like to find out a little bit more about some other uses of these forms, we're going to continue for about another 5 minutes, okay? Just a heads up. Okay, so a couple of these forms that we've been talking about are used to refer to time. Let's talk about allá. Allá in particular is often used to refer to an approximate time frame in the past. So to express the idea of back when or way back when, right? And allí is generally not used in this way. So a couple of examples, or 3 examples. If I want to say something like, back in the era of the dinosaurs, I might say, allá en la época de los dinosaurios. Allá en la época de los dinosaurios. Or if I want to say back in the 1950s, right? Back in the 1950s, allá en los años 50, or back sometime around 1980. So again, it kind of communicates that idea of vagary in time in the past. Allá por el año 1980. Now the form ahí with an H can also be used to express the idea that something happened or is going to happen at a specific moment or point in time. And sometimes you might see the form allí, but this is where I talked about maybe that having been subsumed under ahí, right? So I might say, it was at that moment that the guest arrived, right? Fue ahí que llegaron los invitados. Or we were talking, and that's when he told me that, right? Estábamos conversando, y ahí me contó que. Or somebody might be leaving, and I'm going to say, okay, I'll see you then, right? I'll see you then. Ahí nos vemos. I'll see you then, right? There's already an understood point that we're going to meet up. Ahí nos vemos, right? Ahí nos vemos. So, to refer to a specific moment or point in time. Now, these forms that we've been talking about today, aquí, acá, allí, allí, and allá, can also be combined with other words, components, particles, whatever, to form short phrases. So we're going to look at 2 different types. The ones on this slide are those whose meanings are fairly literal in that the idea of location is maintained, either physically or conceptually, that idea of location, distance, space. So the phrase aquí y allá, right, just means here and there, aquí y allá. Or there's another similar phrase, de allá para acá, or de acá para allá, right? So the kids are kind of running around all over the place, right? De acá para acá, all over the place. We've already seen the forms allí or allá mismo or ahí mismo. So mismo is just added to put a point on that location to make it more precise. Aquí mismo means right here. Ahí mismo means right there, not too far away, but in that exact location. Allí or allá mismo means way over there, but in that precise location. Okay. You can add other prepositions such as de allí, de allá, right? You can say, oh, I'm from Texas. Oh, mis padres también son de allí or de allá, right? Hasta, again, just means toward or until we get to that place, right? Yo voy hasta allá, hasta allá. Hasta ahí, right? Hasta ahí means up until that point. It can mean distance, but it can also have a more conceptual meaning, right? Like, hasta ahí te entiendo, right? I understand you up to that point. Or, right, take this water over to that location, right? Lleva esa agua hasta ahí, right? Por ahí means around there somewhere. Por ahí kind of has an opposite meaning than ahí, because ahí generally means precisely in that location, whereas por ahí means somewhere around there. It's almost purposefully vague, right? If I say, ¿Dónde está José? And somebody doesn't really know, they might just say, no sé, está por ahí, or anda por ahí. He's around there somewhere, right? Then the last 2 are more conceptual. They're sort of used as transitions in writing or speech. A partir de ahí means from that point forward. A partir de ahí, right? And de ahí que is again, a connector that means thus or consequently. Okay, now in this particular slide, we have some phrases in which the forms aquí or acá, allí, allí, allá appear in more colloquial or idiomatic uses, right? A couple of them are even slang expressions. So I'm going to go through this list as quickly and kind of as efficiently as I can, but what I would recommend if you're curious about one of these uses on this slide is that you look them up on a site called wordreference.com, which is a great website for looking up vocabulary and in particular for looking up idiomatic expressions because they have forums. So wordreference.com has a dictionary, look up the word function, but it also has a forum where you can kind of crowdsource the meaning of a phrase, and all of these have already been talked about on numerous threads on that website. So if you're curious about one of them, go ahead and look it up on wordreference.com. The first one here, aquí nomás, is a good example of a slang expression. Really, and about 7 or 8 down, you see allí nomás. Look these two up on word reference. Really, the slang element here is the phrase or the particle no más, which basically means nada más. But it's common for young people, for example, in different countries throughout Latin America. I'm not sure about Spain. If, you know, they're kind of just chilling, relaxing, and you say, ¿Cómo están? Or ¿Cómo estás? And one of them might say, or ¿Qué están haciendo? ¿Qué están haciendo? Nada, aquí nomás pasándola, right? Aquí nomás, we're just hanging out here, right? Aquí nomás pasándola. Allá tú means your problem. You figure it out. Allá tú con tus problemas, right? Go figure out your own problems. Allá tú, right? It's kind of rude. Ir más allá, or the expression la cosa va más allá, means there's more to it than that. There's more to it than that. So I might say, you know, Felipe told me he's separating because blah, blah, blah. Pero la cosa va más allá. There's more to it than that. Sin ir más allá means without going or without looking any further. Sin ir más allá. El más allá, right, is a noun phrase that just means the hereafter. The hereafter, right? So whatever there is after death is el más allá. El más allá, right? Now, a couple forms with allí, or idiomatic expressions with allí. Somebody might be talking and they say something that you know, particularly agree with or find to be accurate or correct, and you may say, ahí está, or ahí sí, right? We just talked about aquí nomás. Ahí nomás sort of means, is really an expression of ambivalence, right? Extreme ambivalence. So if somebody says, do you like your new job, right? And you might say, ahí nomás. Right? Ahí nomás, not really, sort of, ahí nomás. So look that one up. There's some other usages perhaps, right? Ahí nos vemos is just a very common idiomatic expression, or, you know, sort of farewell. I'll see you there. Ahí nos vemos, right? You could say if you've agreed to meet up with someone. You could also use ahí nos vemos as a farewell when you have no idea when you're going to meet up with the person, right? Ahí nos vemos, right? We might see each other around sometime. Andar por ahí, I just talked about a little bit on the previous slide because we had the form por ahí. But andar por ahí means to go around out there somewhere, and it usually has a fairly negative connotation. For example, if I say, ¿Dónde está Julio? And nobody's seen Julio, but he's up to no good, they might say, ¿Quién sabe? Debe andar por ahí, and then they usually add some sort of verb phrase, right? Debe andar, and it's never good. Debe andar por ahí robando, or debe andar por ahí tomando drogas o fumando. Usually andar por ahí is accompanied by some negative verb phrase, okay? Hasta por ahí nomás means only up to a certain point. Hasta por ahí nomás. Like, I really trust Carolina, pero hasta por ahí nomás. Hasta por ahí nomás, right? Just not completely. Hasta por ahí nomás, up to a certain point. Por ahí va la cosa kind of means that's more or less right. Por ahí va la cosa, right? That's more or less right. If I want to say that's not the full story, or that's not all the information, I might say, la cosa no acaba ahí. There's more to it than that, right? That's a good expression, or a good equivalent. There's really more to it than that. La cosa no acaba ahí, right? And then finally, one of my favorite expressions in Spanish, and the same expression exists in Brazilian Portuguese as well, using the form ahí, right, is the expression no estar ni ahí. This is when you really couldn't care less and you want someone to know it, right? So you would say, no estoy ni ahí. I couldn't care less. No estoy ni ahí, right? It's an expression of extreme ambivalence, and couldn't care lessness. It's fairly rude, but sometimes it comes in handy. Alright, that's pretty much it for my presentation on the demonstrative adverbs of place in Spanish. Hope you found it to be clear, informative, and useful. If so, please share it with others and let me know if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, okay? I hope you'll tune in to some of the other lessons here on my channel, and be sure to follow me on all your favorite social media apps and sites for updates about new lessons. Muchas gracias y hasta la próxima. Ciao.